She was laughing when she said it. That's the part I keep coming back to. I was underneath a '68 Mustang when I heard the heels on the concrete floor, that sharp, deliberate click that tells you someone dressed for a boardroom just walked into the wrong building. I didn't move. I had my hands full with a rusted exhaust manifold that had been fighting me for 40 minutes, and I wasn't about to lose on account of whoever just came through the bay door. I was told to ask for the owner, the voice said. My apprentice, a 19-year-old kid named Curtis, who still hadn't learned to read a room, said, "That's him, under the Mustang." I rolled out on the creeper, wiped my hands on the rag hanging from my belt, and looked up at her. She was maybe 50, maybe less. The kind of woman where it's genuinely hard to tell because everything about her is controlled, composed, expensive. Dark blazer, hair pulled back. The sort of calm in her eyes that comes from having people around her who solve problems before she has to notice them. She was looking at the shop the way people look at a place when they're surprised to find it's real. "You're the owner," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I am. My name is Patricia Alderman." She said it the way you'd say the name of a street. Just a fact, no weight attached. I didn't react, which I could tell surprised her slightly. I have a Land Rover, a 2003 Defender 110. It's been sitting in my garage in Rosedale for 8 months. 3 different shops have looked at it. None of them could get it running. I sat up on the creeper. What did the 3 shops tell you? 2 said the ECU was gone. 1 said it was the fuel pump. They all said parts were impossible to source. I nodded slowly. On a Defender that old, sourcing is half the job. She paused. "A friend of mine said you're the only person in Toronto who still works on them properly." That friend was probably Hugh Tanner, a retired land surveyor I'd done 3 Defenders for over the years. I didn't ask. "I can take a look," I said. "I can't promise a timeline." She looked around the shop again. The Mustang, the old Bronco in the back corner, the wall of hand-labeled bins my father had organized 30 years ago, and I'd never had the heart to redo. Then she looked back at me with something that might have been a small, private decision being made. "If you can get that truck running," she said, "I'll give you whatever you want. Name your price." I thought she was just being dramatic. Rich people sometimes talk like that. I almost smiled. "We'll sort out the invoice when I know what I'm dealing with," I said. She pulled a card from her jacket, set it on the workbench without looking for a clean spot. "My assistant will arrange the delivery. Her name is Michelle. She'll call tomorrow morning." She left the way she came in, heels on concrete, clean and deliberate. I went back under the Mustang. Curtis waited about 4 seconds. "You know who that is, right?" "Patricia Alderman. Her family built half of downtown Toronto. Literally built it, Alderman Properties. My dad's office building has her name on it." I found the bolt I'd been hunting for and started turning. Doesn't change what's wrong with the truck. My daughter Rosie was 7 that autumn. She had her mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which was a combination that made bedtime negotiations genuinely exhausting. Her mother, Claire, had been gone for 4 years by then. Not gone as in left, gone as in a highway and black ice, and a transport truck that came over the center line. Gone in the way that doesn't leave room for closure, just a new kind of quiet that you eventually learn to live inside. Rosie didn't remember much about Claire anymore. That was the part I'd been told would be a mercy, and it was, except that sometimes Rosie would ask me about a feeling she couldn't name, and I'd know exactly what it was, and not know how to explain it to a 7-year-old. She was doing homework at the kitchen table when I got home that night. My mother, Diane, was washing dishes. She'd been coming over 3 evenings a week since Claire died, which was supposed to be temporary and had quietly become permanent. I'd never found the right moment to tell her it meant everything to me. "Girl from school says her dad drives a Ferrari," Rosie said, not looking up from her printing. "Good for him. She says it's the fastest car in the world. It's one of them." Rosie considered this with the weight of someone evaluating a legal claim. "Could you fix a Ferrari?" "Probably." "Could you fix it faster than her dad could?" I pulled a chair out and sat down across from her. I could fix it. Her dad probably couldn't fix anything. Rosie grinned at her worksheet. That's what I thought. My mother put a plate in front of me without being asked. Roast chicken, the kind with the crispy skin she knew I liked. I looked at the back of her head and thought about how much invisible work holds a life together, and how rarely anyone names it. The Defender arrived on a flatbed 2 days later. When they rolled it off the truck, I just stood and looked at it for a minute. It was a 1998 Michelle had called to correct the year. County edition, Coniston green under about a decade of garage dust. The body was straight. The interior was original. Someone had kept it out of the weather and away from road salt, which up here in Ontario is basically the whole fight. Whatever was wrong with it mechanically, the bones were good. I spent the first hour just looking. Not poking, not testing, just looking the way my father taught me, which was to let the vehicle tell you what it wanted to tell you before you started asking questions it wasn't ready to answer. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in working on a machine that someone cared about. You can feel it in the way things are worn, evenly, purposefully, without neglect. Whoever had driven this truck had known how to drive it. They'd understood weight and ground clearance, and the way a live axle talks to you on uneven terrain. I found myself curious about that person in a way I don't usually get curious about customers. I started with the fuel system. The third shop had been partially right. The lift pump was weak, nearly dead, but it wasn't the whole story. I pulled codes from the ECU and they were messy but not fatal. Someone had chased a symptom and given up before finding the cause. That happens when a shop doesn't want to commit to a job they're not sure they can finish. I finished my initial look-around 7 that evening. Rosie was at my mother's for the night. The shop was quiet in the way it only gets after dark, when the street outside goes still and it's just you and the tools and whatever you're working on. I called the number on the card. Patricia Alderman answered herself, which surprised me. "It's not the ECU," I said. "The lift pump is dying and there's a secondary fuel pressure issue I want to trace before I commit to a diagnosis. I'd also like to know more about the truck's history. Who worked on it before it sat?" A pause. "My husband used to maintain it. He passed away 6 years ago." "I'm sorry." "He had a mechanic. A man named Reginald something. I don't have a last name. I could try to find records." "If you can, it would help." Another pause, longer this time, mister. She stopped. "I don't actually know your name." "Cole," I said. "Brendan Cole." "Mr. Cole, that truck was my husband's. He drove it across the country twice, once before we were married and once when our son was 12. He loved it in a way that I think embarrassed him slightly, because he wasn't otherwise a sentimental man." She stopped again. I didn't fill the silence. I'd like it to run again. I looked at the truck across the shop floor, just sitting there in the half-dark, with 30 years of someone's life under the hood. "I'll figure it out," I said. I spent the better part of 3 weeks on that truck. The fuel pressure issue led me to the injector pump, which had been rebuilt at some point, and rebuilt wrong, not dangerously wrong, not the kind of wrong that would have caused a failure right away, but the kind of wrong that accumulates slowly, quietly, until one day the truck just doesn't start, and you can't find a reason because the reason is buried in work that looked right from the outside. The rebuild stamp was there, though, faint on the pump housing, partially obscured by a bead of sealant that had been applied afterward. I photographed it and cleaned the area carefully. There was a shop code I didn't recognize, not the kind of generic stamp a parts house puts on a rebuilt unit. This was a custom stamp, initials and a number, the kind a working mechanic uses to mark his own work. I sat back and looked at it for a long time. I have a habit, which some people find obsessive and I find essential, of keeping records, not just of the vehicles I work on, but of the work I encounter, other shops' repairs, other mechanics' methods, patterns I've noticed over years of inheriting other people's half-finished jobs. I had a binder on the shelf that went back 15 years. I found the stamp on a Thursday afternoon. I matched it by Saturday morning. The initials belonged to a man named Reginald Marsh, who had run a small independent garage in Scarborough through the late 90s and early 2000s. Reginald was dead. He'd had a partner, a younger man named Dale Burrows, who had taken over the shop when Reginald retired and then run it into the ground over about 3 years. Dale Burrows had since reinvented himself as a vintage vehicle consultant who charged significant fees to people in Rosedale and Forest Hill for advice on old cars they'd inherited and didn't know how to care for. I had heard Dale Burrows' name before, twice from 2 different customers in contexts I hadn't liked. The pump rebuild wasn't illegal. It was bad work, corners cut, tolerances ignored, but it wasn't fraud on its own. What made me sit with it longer than I should have was the sealant over the stamp. You don't apply sealant there. There's no functional reason to. The only reason to put sealant over your own stamp is so someone else can't find it. I photographed everything again. I wrote my notes. Then I called Patricia Alderman. I found what's wrong with the truck, I said. The injector pump was rebuilt incorrectly at some point before it came to you, or before it stopped running. Do you know if your husband had recent work done on the pump before he passed? A long pause. I wouldn't know. He handled everything mechanical himself or with Reginald. Are you saying this is why it stopped running? This is a significant part of why. The lift pump didn't help, but the pump rebuild is what accelerated the problem. I paused. Do you have a relationship with a man named Dale Burrows? The pause that followed was different, shorter and colder. He's advised me about the truck several times over the years. He told me it would need extensive work that likely wasn't worth doing. He recommended I consider selling it. I looked at my notes. He ever recommend a buyer? Silence. Mrs. Alderman. He mentioned a client who collected Defenders. He offered to facilitate. A 1998 County edition in straight body condition, original interior, documented history. You're looking at $80,000–$90,000 in the current Canadian collector market. Maybe more if the provenance is right and the story's there. I think, I said carefully, that you should hold off on any conversations with Mr. Burrows until the truck is running and you've had it properly appraised. Her voice, when she answered, was very quiet and very controlled. Are you telling me what I think you're telling me? I'm telling you the truck can be fixed. I'm telling you the pump was done badly and on purpose, and I think you should know that before you make any decisions about it. She came to the shop 2 days later. She came alone this time, no assistant, no arrangement. She just showed up at 10 in the morning in the same dark blazer and stood in front of the truck with her arms crossed and looked at it for a long time without speaking. I gave her the space. I was at the bench doing unrelated work, and I let her have whatever she needed to have. After a while, she said, his name was Paul. He bought this truck in 1992 in Vancouver. He drove it back to Toronto alone. It took him 11 days because he kept stopping. I put down what I was holding. He said later that he stopped because the truck kept asking him to. That's how he talked about it. She almost smiled. He was an engineer, very precise man, but that's what he said. Sounds like a good truck. 50. It was his. She looked at the pump housing, which I'd left exposed so she could see what I was showing her. Reginald was his mechanic for years. Reginald died 8 years ago. Brendan, Dale, came to me at the funeral. He said he'd trained under Reginald. He said he wanted to continue looking after the truck in Reginald's memory. She looked at me then, steady and direct. I trusted him because of that, because of the connection to Reginald. I didn't say anything, because there was nothing useful to say. The thing about being deceived by someone who uses your grief as their lever is that understanding it doesn't make it smaller. What do I do? She asked. Get an independent appraisal. Document everything I've found. If you want, I can put it all in writing. The work history, the pump, the stamp, what it means mechanically. You can take that to whoever you need to take it to. And the truck? I'll finish the work. She'll run. Patricia Alderman looked at the truck for another long moment. Then she looked back at me. Paul would have liked you, she said. It came out simply, without performance. I believed her. Rosie came to the shop on the Saturday I started the truck for the first time. She wasn't supposed to be there. My mother was supposed to have her. But my mother had a dental appointment, and the timing collapsed, and Rosie ended up on the bench in the corner with a juice box and a coloring book, while I finished the last of the connections. She watched without asking questions, which for a 7-year-old is a significant act of restraint. She'd grown up in this shop in the way that kids who grow up in a parent's workplace grow up, half bored, half completely formed by the place. She knew the names of the tools. She knew not to touch anything hot. She knew, somehow, when something important was about to happen. I primed the system. I got in the driver's seat. I turned the key. The Defender coughed once, like something waking up from a long sleep, and then it caught. The engine turned over with the particular low, rolling sound that a 300 TDI makes when it's healthy, a sound like something that intends to keep going for a very long time. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel and listened. Then I heard Rosie from the bench, Dad. Yeah. It sounds good. It does. She went back to her coloring book. I sat in the truck. Patricia Alderman came the following Tuesday to collect it. She brought her son, a man named Andrew who was maybe 30 and had his father's build and his mother's eyes. He walked around the truck 3 times without speaking before he got in the driver's seat and just sat there with his hands in his lap. I stood with Patricia near the bay door. Andrew was 12 when Paul drove him across the country in this, she said quietly. I nodded. He doesn't talk about his father much. He's not built for it. She watched her son through the windscreen. He was still just sitting, but he asked to come today. I handed her the folder, the full written account of the repair, the photographs, the notes on the pump, the stamp, everything she'd need if she decided to pursue anything further regarding Dale Burrows. She took it without looking at it, which told me she'd already decided. What do I owe you? She asked. I gave her the number. It was a fair number. Parts, labor, the time I'd spent tracing the problem properly instead of guessing. She didn't react to it. She wrote the check without setting it on anything, just held it against her palm and wrote. And 50. She handed it to me, and then looked at me for a moment in the way people look at you when they're deciding whether to say something. I meant what I said, she said, whatever you want. The work was enough, I said. She almost smiled. You and Paul would have gotten along very well. Andrew started the truck from inside the bay. The 300 TDI filled the shop with that long, rolling, purposeful sound. He backed it out carefully, got it onto the street, and then just sat there for a moment with the engine running. I watched from the bay door. Patricia walked to the passenger side. She got in. I don't know what they said to each other. I don't know if they said anything at all. The truck pulled away from the curb slowly, like something with somewhere to go, but not in any hurry to get there. Curtis was sweeping up when I went back inside. So what happens now? He said. Now we get the Mustang finished. He leaned on the broom, with the alderman woman. Do you think she'll? Curtis. 50. He stopped. The truck runs, I said. That's what needed to happen. He thought about that. Then he went back to sweeping. I walked to the back of the shop where my father's wall of bins was, all the hand-labeled ones he'd organized by size and type and application. Some of the labels were in his handwriting, and some were in mine, and you couldn't always tell which was which anymore. Rosie had taped something to the corner of the bottom shelf. I hadn't noticed it before, a drawing she'd done on a square of yellow paper. A truck, roughly sketched in green crayon, with a stick figure driving it and another stick figure standing beside it, presumably me. She'd written underneath, in the oversized, confident printing of a child who's just mastered the skill, "It sounds good." I stood there for a minute. Then I went and found the Mustang's file and got back to work. I still think about the sealant over that stamp. It wasn't a dramatic thing. It was maybe a centimeter of gray sealant, applied carefully over a set of initials on a pump housing. Anyone who didn't know what they were looking at would never have seen it. Most mechanics wouldn't have looked that closely. Most shops would have replaced the pump, charged for it, moved on. Nobody would have been the wiser. But someone put that sealant there deliberately, and that's the thing I can't quite let go of. Not the fraud itself, but the calculation behind it. The decision to cover something up rather than own it. The bet that nobody would ever look closely enough to find it. That bet almost paid off. For years it did pay off. What Dale Burrows didn't account for was that some people still care enough to look. Not because they're trying to catch anyone. Not because they're suspicious by nature. But because they were taught that the work matters. That how you do a thing is inseparable from who you are. And that cutting a corner in private is the same as cutting it in front of everyone who ever trusted you. My father ran this shop for 31 years. He used to say that a mechanic's real job isn't fixing cars. It's being the kind of person people can bring their car to. The car is just the test. What's actually being asked is, can I trust you? Will you tell me the truth even when the truth is more expensive? Will you do the job right even when nobody's watching? I didn't fully understand that when he said it. I was maybe 22, impatient to get good at the technical side of things. The integrity piece felt abstract to me then, like something old men said. It doesn't feel abstract anymore. When I found that stamp and understood what it meant, I had a choice. I could have said nothing. Fixed the pump, invoiced Patricia fairly, stayed in my lane. Nobody was asking me to investigate anything. It wasn't my problem. But here's what I know about that kind of silence. It's never actually neutral. Choosing not to say something when you know something, that's still a choice. And it has consequences, just slower ones, quieter ones. The kind that don't show up until a woman in Rosedale has already lost a truck that meant something, and the man who was supposed to care for it has pocketed a commission on a sale that should never have happened. Rosie's drawing is still on the shelf, the green crayon truck, the stick figure standing beside it. It sounds good. She didn't draw that because she understood anything about injector pumps or collector markets or men who cover their stamps with sealant. She drew it because she was sitting in the shop, watching her dad do his job, and something about it felt right to her. Kids know things they don't have words for yet. They feel the integrity of a thing before they can name it. That's what I want her to carry. Not the technical knowledge, she can learn that any time. I want her to grow up knowing that the way you do your work is a statement about who you are. That being honest when it costs you something is not a sacrifice, it's just what honest people do. And that the capacity to sit with a hard problem, to trace it back, to not give up before the real answer, that's not stubbornness. That's the thing that holds everything else together. Patricia came back for her truck and drove away with her son. I went back to work. That's the whole story, really.